Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. My name is Rachel Christone. I'm the Director of Education here at the Salem Witch Museum.
And I'm Jill Christensen. I'm the Assistant Director of Education.
Welcome to our first Rev 250 event, our Founding Mothers and Fathers, Revolutionary War Connections to the Salem Witch Trials. Now, the American Ancestors Organization once estimated that 15 million people can trace their family line back to the Salem Witch Trials. We often tell our visitors that the English colonists of 1692 were the founding fathers and mothers of our country. They were themselves descended from the earliest settlers who were establishing a new country and took the biblical instruction to be fruitful and multiply to heart. So we often find fascinating connections between the Salem witch trials and the Revolutionary War generation, the one most often termed our founding fathers. With Rev 250 celebrations in full swing, this presentation is going to share some of these really interesting stories, including that of Reverend George Burroughs, the Putnam family of Salem Village, Reverend John Hale of Beverly, and Abigail Faulkner of Andover. Now, just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements before we get started. So as we usually do with these presentations, we will have a Q&A at the end, so please hold your questions until the last 15 minutes or so. We are going to turn our camera off so you can see the full PowerPoint as we go on. Like we said, we're very excited about some of these images. They're really quite colorful and beautiful, but we will turn the camera back on for the Q&A at the end. And this presentation is being recorded and it will be made available on our digital archive on our website, either today or tomorrow. And let's get started.
One of the 19 people hanged for witchcraft in Salem in 1692, and the most alarming in some respects, was the former minister of Salem Village, Reverend George Burroughs. Arrested in Maine, brought back to Salem, and convicted, he was executed along with 4 other innocents on August 19th. How could a man of God not only be accused of witchcraft, but be convicted and hanged for it? It must have been one of the most frightening occurrences of the entire trials. Clearly, no one was safe. Burroughs' story in brief is as follows. Born in England circa 1650, Burroughs traveled to the New World and completed his ministerial studies at Harvard College in 1670. He was one of only a few men willing to preach on the Maine frontier, where attacks from the indigenous people and their French allies were a constant threat. He was living in Falmouth, which is Portland today, in 1676 when the Wabanaki burned the town, and he fled south with several others for safety. These refugees landed in Salisbury, Mass., where Burroughs ministered for a time until called by the people of Salem Village to be the second leader of their congregation, which had only been given permission to gather separately from Salem town in 1672. Serving in Salem Village from 1680 to 1683, Burroughs found a divided community who were forever disagreeing about his role, his rights, his pay, and his firewood. He was the first to live in the newly built parsonage, the discovery of the foundation of which was led by the great Richard Trask in 1970. By 1683, Burroughs had tired of the parish bickering and decided to return to the Casco Bay area of Maine, but not before he had drawn some unwanted attention and gossip. People said he was strict with his first wife. When she died and he remarried, people said he married too soon, and apparently treated her severely too. Unable to pay for his first wife's funeral, he borrowed money from John Putnam, with whom he had lived before the parsonage was built. Burroughs moved to Maine in 1683, but returned to Salem Village of his own accord to settle up his accounts in May of that year, and was immediately arrested by Putnam for the outstanding debt. The fact that Burroughs' own salary was in arrears was not immediately taken into consideration. Although the money issues were settled and Burroughs was released, he left bad feelings behind him when he returned to Maine. A decade later, as several of the afflicted pointed their fingers at Burroughs in 1692, the list of grievances against him was quite long. In addition to his reported treatment of his wives and his rapid remarrying, which had happened for a third time in Maine, it was said he was diabolically strong, had failed to baptize all of his children, did not maintain proper worship in his home, and was, in fact, the king of hell. It was his intention to tear down the Puritan community and replace it with the devil's kingdom, his accusers claimed. He was also accused of murdering his first two wives. Reverend Burroughs was eventually convicted and condemned to death, hanged on Proctor's Ledge with 4 others on August 19th. Prior to his execution, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly. It was believed that witches were unable to complete this exercise, and so his success led to murmurings in the crowd. Could it be he was not guilty after all? And what is the Revolutionary War link? One of George's great-grandsons was Robert Newman, sexton of Christ Church, located in the north end of Boston, and today more commonly known as the Old North Church. Newman's pivotal role? He was one of the men who carried a lantern into the Tower of Old North on the evening of April 18, 1775. This signaled to Paul Revere and the Patriots that the British were moving toward Concord and Lexington via the sea or the Charles River in search of cannons and ammunition. First, let's make the connection from Burroughs to Newman. George Burroughs married the first of his 3 wives, Hannah Fisher, before 1674 in Maine. During the 3 years Burroughs served as minister in Salem Village, Hannah died in 1681 while giving birth to their last child, Elizabeth, also known as Eliza. Elizabeth married Peter Thomas in 1704. Their daughter Mary was born in 1709. Mary married Thomas Churchman Newman in Boston in 1732. Robert was their son, making him Burroughs' great-grandson. Special thanks to historian Marilyn Roach, who pointed out the last document referenced in the records of the Salem witch hunt, which is the huge compendium of Salem witch trials documents published in 2009. Dated March 28, 1750, the document is a memorial and petition from Thomas Newman and 2 others, requesting that their plea on behalf of the surviving children and grandchildren of Reverend George Burroughs be considered, as it apparently had not been addressed by the court after a previous submission. Thomas was obviously petitioning on behalf of his wife's side of the family. Thomas and Mary Newman's 6th and last child, Reverend Burroughs' great-grandson, was Robert, born on March 20th, 1752. Robert's father, Thomas, died in 1754 when Robert was only 2 years old. His mother remarried to widower John Gibbs, renowned artist at Christ Church. Gibbs's first wife was the daughter of Reverend Timothy Cutler, the church's first minister. The Newman family's connection to Old North Church only increased over time. In 1772, when he was 20, Robert Newman became the church's sexton. The sexton's job is to keep the building and grounds in good repair, ring the church bells, and bury the dead. Robert owned pews number 50 and number 78. His brother John was the church organist. In the next few years, tensions mounted. The Intolerable Acts were passed by English Parliament in 1774 as punishment for the Boston Tea Party the previous year. These Intolerable Acts involved closing the port of Boston, repealing the Charter of 1691, yes, the very same delivered to Massachusetts by Governor William Phips during the witch trials, requiring Bostonians to quarter British soldiers, and trying crimes that had been committed in the New World in England. Newman found himself, 1, the great-grandson of a Puritan minister who had been executed for witchcraft, 2, an important member of an Anglican church, or the Church of England, and 3, siding with the Patriots against England. These were complicated times. On the night of April 18th, per Paul Revere's plan, Newman slipped out of his mother's house where he was living and joined vestryman Captain John Pulling. The pair set 2 lamps in the church tower windows and gave the anticipated signal. According to the Old North website, Newman returned to the nearby home of his mother, where British soldiers were also housed. Remember, that was the law of the day. He was arrested the next day, being one of only a few who had keys to the church. Newman apparently threw Pulling under the bus, claiming he had loaned his keys to the other man. Pulling, for his part, had already fled Boston for safety. Sadly, Robert Newman committed suicide by pistol in 1804 at the age of 52. No other details were immediately found. A strange fact is that there was a second Robert Newman who also lived in Boston's North End, and for years, historians tangled the two men together, not unlike the witch trials' Bridget and Sarah Bishop. Robert Newman was referred to as the sexton of Old North and a seafaring privateer. This confusion led to inaccurate gravestone inscriptions. Today, though, it's clear these were two separate men. The signal sent from the Tower of Old North to Revere is an iconic moment in American history. Interestingly, apparently no one wondered who was responsible for the signal lights until after Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published his famous poem, Paul Revere's Ride, in 1861. The line, "One if by land and two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be," piqued interest. The Pulling and Newman descendants squabbled over the credit, it seems, but today most historians think these are the two men responsible. We wonder what Reverend Burroughs would have thought of his descendants' participation in this pivotal event in the country's fight for independence. A figure I particularly admire from the Salem witch trials is Abigail Faulkner of Andover. Daughter of the town's Reverend Francis Dane, Abigail frequently and capably was forced to shoulder the responsibilities of her own household due to the mysterious recurring sickness of her husband. She was also one of the leading forces seeking reparation for the wrongs done the innocent victims when the trials came to an end in the spring of 1693. Abigail's story begins in Andover, in an area that is North Andover today, where she was born in 1652, the youngest child of the town's second minister, Francis Dane. The day before her 23rd birthday in 1675, Abigail married Francis Faulkner, who was the oldest son of one of the earliest settlers of Andover, Edmund Faulkner. The couple had 8 children between 1676 and the mid-1690s. Sometime in the late 1680s, Francis developed an unspecified illness, experiencing convulsions, memory loss, and impaired understanding. Although his symptoms subsided somewhat by the time the witchcraft hysteria began in the spring of 1692, they returned at the end of that year. Abigail had to manage all the family's affairs during Edmund's bouts with sickness. While witchcraft accusations occurred throughout Essex County, Andover became the town with more accused innocents than any other. The toll the Andover witch hunt took on the family of Reverend Dane was extraordinary. Says historian Emerson Baker, quote, "In all, 28 members of Dane's immediate and extended family would be accused of witchcraft," unquote. Among these were Abigail Faulkner and her sister, Elizabeth Johnson, the Reverend's daughter-in-law, Deliverance Dane, and 2 of the minister's nieces by marriage, Martha Carrier and Elizabeth Howe. Both of these women were convicted and hanged. Also accused was Reverend Dane's granddaughter, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., which may be a familiar name to those of you who follow the witch trials history closely. She was the last, as far as we know, of the 1692 convicted to have her name officially cleared, which happened in July of 2022. 22-year-old Elizabeth Jr., or Betty as she was known, was arrested in August of 1692 and readily admitted to numerous demonic activities and accused many others, including family members. She may have had some developmental issues. Even her grandfather, the Reverend, described her as simplish at best. After her confessions, the snowball began to gain momentum as the arrests of Betty's aunt Abigail, aged 40, and then Betty's mother, sister, and brother soon followed. This was a particularly frightening time of the witch trials as the sheer number of accusations increased, and by this time, September, it was believed that confessing to witchcraft and pointing fingers at others was the only way to save one's own life. To her credit, Abigail never accused anyone else and initially would not confess, despite enormous pressure from the magistrates and family members. Her examination notes read, quote, "But she refused to confess, saying God would not require her to confess that she was not guilty of," unquote. She would eventually admit that the devil may have used her as his instrument. Sadly, even Abigail's two young daughters, 12-year-old Dorothy and 9-year-old Abigail, admitted to being witches, made so by their mother, they said. They were in prison. They were likely terrified by their time spent in jail and the overwhelming fear that permeated the entire community. Abigail Faulkner was condemned and sentenced to death in September, along with 14 others. 8 from the list of 15 were hanged on September 22nd. Because she was pregnant with her 7th child, Abigail was granted a delay and remained in jail awaiting her execution. By this time, a large part of the populace had turned against the proceedings of the court. Governor William Phipps disbanded the Court of Oyer and Terminer in October, and a new court was not scheduled to hear the remaining cases until January of 1693. Goodman Faulkner's sickness returned in late 1692. On December 3rd, after 4 months in Salem jail, Abigail Faulkner petitioned Governor Phipps for a pardon and begged for her release. Pointing out that she had been condemned by spectral evidence and false confessions, she said, quote, "Undoubtedly, I should have been put to death had it not pleased the Lord I had been with child. Thanks be to the Lord, I know myself altogether innocent and ignorant of the crime of witchcraft which is laid to my charge. My husband, about 5 years ago, was taken with fits, which did very much impair his memory and understanding, but with the blessing of the Lord upon my endeavors, did recover of them again. But now, through grief and sorrow, they are returned to him again, as bad as ever they were. I, having 6 children and having little or nothing to subsist on, and I being closely confined, can see no other ways but we shall all perish," unquote. Phipps did not grant her request for a release. Only 3 more people were convicted by the new court in January, which no longer accepted spectral evidence. Among them was Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. Governor Phipps finally made the decision to reprieve all who had been convicted. Abigail Faulkner's jail fees were likely paid quickly, and she returned home to her family. On March 20th, 1693, Abigail gave birth to the baby that had saved her life. He was named Ami Ruama, which roughly translated means, "My people had mercy." Abigail Faulkner continued to fight for her civil liberties to be restored, and finally, in 1703, she, Elizabeth Proctor, and Sarah Wardwell were cleared. Additional efforts in 1711, 1957, and 2001 cleared all but one name. As previously mentioned, Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. finally achieved justice in 2022. After 55 years of marriage, Abigail and Francis died in Andover within 2 years of each other. Abigail on February 5th, 1730, and Francis on September 19th, 1732. Abigail's grandson, Colonel Francis Faulkner, played an important role in the Revolutionary War just over 80 years after the Salem witch trials. In June of 1726, 4 years before his mother's death, Ami Ruama, the baby that had saved Abigail from execution, married his cousin, Hannah Ingalls, in Andover. He was 33 years old. The couple moved from Andover in the 1730s, perhaps after the death of Ami's parents, Abigail and Francis, first living in Littleton, Mass., and then settling in Acton, Mass. By the late 1730s to the early 1740s. Originally known as Concord Village, the settlement separated from Concord in 1735 and became Acton. The Faulkners had 6 children, 2 born in Andover and 4 in Littleton. In Acton, the family moved into a house on High Street, just off Main Street, that was originally built for Ephraim Jones, circa 1707. Directly across the street were mills along Fort Pond Brook. The site today is the center of the village of South Acton in Acton, Mass. Ephraim Jones and two partners built a dam and textile or fulling mill on the Fort Pond Brook in 1702. A sawmill was built in 1706, and Jones's home a year or so later. Jones died in 1710, after which others continued to own and operate the mills. Ami Ruama first leased the fulling mill business in 1738 and then purchased it 4 years later, as well as the house across the street. According to a timeline created by the Ironwork Farm, which today stewards the Faulkner homestead, quote, Ami and his sons and grandson were all clothiers by trade and operated the Faulkner mills for almost a century, unquote. Ami was involved with the mill's operation until his death in 1756. Then future Faulkner generations continued until 1813. In 1908, Faulkner heirs sold the property into non-family hands, and various companies ran the mills into the 20th century, among them General Mills, from 1937 to 1942. It was in 1943 that the Erickson family purchased it and continues to operate the Erickson grain mill there to this day. The Faulkner House was the largest and most central house of the Acton settlement, and so served as the local garrison, a place to protect citizens from native attacks. The Great Room, it is said in some histories, can fit 100 people. Today, the Faulkner House, sometimes referred to as the Jones Faulkner House, is the oldest colonial structure still standing in Acton. 6 generations of Faulkners resided there. Ami's son, Francis Faulkner, who was born in Andover in 1728, had married 21-year-old Elizabeth, or Lizzie, Mussey at the end of April 1756 in Lexington. Sadly, the couple was only married 38 days before Lizzie died in June. Francis's father, Ami, died just 2 months later, in August, at the age of 64. These were 3 enormous life-changing events: marrying, losing his wife, and losing his father, for Francis to endure in a matter of months. Francis remarried to 23-year-old Rebecca Keyes in 1759. The couple's first child was Francis Jr., born in 1760. At least 8 children followed over the next 16 years. As the Revolutionary War years approached, Francis had become a respected civic leader of the community. He was town clerk for 35 years, including in 1770, as evidenced by his signature as the town council met to discuss the actions recently made by the British Parliament regarding taxes, especially on tea, and the straits the colonists found themselves in. Like many Massachusetts communities, Acton agreed not to consume British tea or other goods. Francis was a member of the committee to ensure compliance. Acton also agreed to join the Continental Congress. In November of 1774, a group of Minutemen were raised with Isaac Davis as commander, the group meeting every week to train. Francis Faulkner, although he had a military commission under the auspices of King George, renounced his allegiance to the crown as tensions rose. In 1775, Francis was made major of Acton's West Militia Company, and just before the events of April that year, colonel of the Middlesex Regiment. On the morning of April 19, 1775, the Faulkner House was a rallying center. A rather dramatic, but I think great description of the events that transpired comes from Reverend James Fletcher's 1890 History of Acton. Quote, Francis Faulkner Jr., a boy of 15 years, was lying awake early in the morning, no one yet moving, and listening to the clatter of a horse's feet drawing nearer and nearer. Suddenly he leaped from his bed, ran into his father's room, and cried out, Father, there's a horse coming on the full run, and he's bringing news. His father, Colonel Francis, already had on his pantaloons and his gun in his hand. The fleet horseman, this is likely Dr. Samuel Prescott, wheeled across the bridge and up to the house and shouted, "Rouse your Minutemen, Mr. Faulkner. The British are marching on Lexington and Concord," and away he went to spread the news. Mr. Faulkner, without stopping to dress, fired 3 times as fast as he could load and fire, that being the signal to call out the Minutemen. Being the chairman of safety and colonel of the Middlesex Regiment of Militia, the men were to assemble at his house. Almost immediately, a neighbor repeated the signal. Signal fires were also lighted, and every house awoke from its slumbers to the new era. By this time, the family were all up in the greatest commotion, the younger children crying because the British would come and kill them. Very soon, the Minutemen began to come in, everyone with his gun, powder horn, pouch of bullets, and a piece of bread and cheese, the only breakfast he proposed to make before meeting the enemy of his country. Some came hurrying in with their wives and children in the greatest excitement to get more certain news and to know what was to be done. Word came from Captain Davis that he would march as soon as 30 should come in. In the meantime, they were busy in driving down stakes on the lawn and hanging kettles for cooking the soldiers' dinners. The women would cook the dinner, and some of the elder boys, of whom Francis Jr. was one, were designated to bring it along packed in saddlebags. The line was formed on the lawn south of the house, and they marched. Colonel Faulkner accompanied them to take command of the Middlesex Regiment, as the other companies would come in at Concord." Unquote. The Acton militiamen marched to the North Bridge, some 7 miles away, and as we know, the shot heard round the world was fired that day. Faulkner and his men were among those who pursued the retreating British to Charlestown. The Concord battle, in which Acton's commander of the Minutemen, Isaac Davis, was sadly killed, in fact, he was the first patriot to fall, was not the only Revolutionary War battle in which Colonel Francis Faulkner took part. His regiment was called to reinforce the Continental Army at Dorchester Heights under the command of George Washington in March of 1776. This precipitated the end of the siege of Boston and the British troops' evacuation of the city. Faulkner was still in service in the fall of 1777 when British General Burgoyne surrendered at Saratoga. Faulkner commanded the regiment that guarded the British prisoners after this turning point in the war. France signed a treaty with the United States against England, successfully ending the War for Independence. Back home in Acton after the war, Francis Faulkner remained involved in the town's political and civic efforts. He and his brother, Ammi Jr., continued to run the Faulkner Mills until 1787, when Francis Jr. took over. Colonel Faulkner died on August 5th, 1805, at the age of 77. Francis, his young wife Elizabeth, his second wife Rebecca, and his parents, Ammi, Ruama, and Hannah, are all buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in Acton, along with many from the Faulkner family. What a fateful pregnancy was Abigail's child, Ammi Ruama. He saved her from execution, a miscarriage of justice, and survived himself, and sired an important military and community leader of the Revolutionary War. My people had mercy indeed.
Another interesting connection can be found in the line of Reverend John Hale, the minister of Beverly from 1667 until his death in 1700. As a spiritual leader in Salem Village's neighboring parish, Reverend Hale was involved in the witchcraft panic from the very start. He was among the group of local ministers and gentlemen invited to observe the mysterious illness of Betty Paris and Abigail Williams in the early days of 1692. He remained supportive of the proceedings when the initial arrests and examinations took place, evidently believing there was a true danger of malevolent witchcraft. This was not Reverend Hale's first experience with witchcraft suspicions. In 1648, Margaret Jones was the first person executed for the crime of witchcraft in Massachusetts Bay Colony. At the age of 12, John Hale accompanied his father, a deacon in a neighboring church, to witness the execution in Boston, likely underscoring the dangerous reality of witchcraft for this young boy. Witnessing many of the events during the Salem Panic firsthand, Hale later recalled, quote, "I observed in the prosecution of these affairs that there was in the justices, judges, and others concerned a conscientious endeavor to do the thing that is right." Unquote. On several occasions, he accompanied the magistrates when they questioned a prisoner in jail and was present for at least the first execution in 1692. Eventually, Reverend Hale moved from his role as spiritual advisor and observer to a participant in the witchcraft proceedings. On 2 occasions, he provided testimony against members of his parish. In May, he gave a deposition describing an incident involving Sarah Bishop of Beverly. According to this testimony, 5 or 6 years before, one of his parishioners requested that he not provide communion to Goody Bishop because she and her husband operated a rather rowdy, unlicensed tavern. According to Hale, this same parishioner became distracted after voicing her dismay about her neighbor. This illness went on for about a month until she ultimately killed herself by slitting her throat with a pair of scissors. Reverend Hale recalled in his deposition that, quote, I then judged and still do apprehend it impossible for her with so short a pair of scissors to mangle herself without some extraordinary work of the devil or witchcraft. In early September, he appeared before the court again, this time to testify against Dorcas Hoare of Beverly. A known fortune teller with a history of criminal incidents, Reverend Hale recounted decades of struggles with Goodwife Hoare. 14 years before, she had discovered she was at the center of a local burglary ring, and that his own family had been victims of their thievery. Dorcas Hoare was ultimately found guilty by the Court of Oyer and Terminer. Facing mounting testimony against her, she confessed and was set for execution on September 22nd. However, she avoided the hangman's rope thanks to a petition asking that she receive a stay of execution for 1 month. The petition asked that she be given time to realize and perfect her repentance for the salvation of her soul, and thus allow her to prepare for death in eternity. The petition, signed by John Hale and 3 other ministers, was accepted, and Dorcas Hoare was granted an additional month to prepare for her execution. This act would ultimately save her life, as September 22nd would be the last execution date during the Salem witch trials. By this time, popular favor was turning against the witchcraft panic. Though it is unclear precisely when, Reverend Hale was among those who grew skeptical of the proceedings, eventually coming to believe innocent people had been harmed as a result of the witch hunt. The memory of this injustice evidently stayed with the minister long after the Salem witch trials came to an end. Published posthumously in 1702, John Hale offered his own account of the witch panic in his work, A Modest Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft. Told from the perspective of an eyewitness, this book combined a reasoned, meticulous criticism of the mistakes made in 1692 with his own personal recollection of the fears, decisions, and challenges that led to the witch trials. The book also included an extensive analysis of the traditional evidence used to prosecute witches. Hale felt it essential to discuss the methods used to discover and convict witches, calling them unsafe principles, and arguing, quote, we may hence see ground to fear that there had been a great deal of innocent blood shed in the Christian world. He went on to say, quote, but such was the darkness of the day, the tortures and lamentations of the afflicted, and the power of former precedents, that we walked in the clouds and could not see our way, and we have most cause to be humbled for error on that hand, which cannot be retrieved. Following the death of his first wife in 1683, John Hale married Sarah Noyes, daughter of Newbury pastor James Noyes. This was a family of divines, as many of her immediate family members were called to the ministry, including her grandfather, great-uncle, and 2 brothers, one of whom was among the ministers who later founded Yale University. Her first cousin, Nicholas Noyes, was the junior minister of Salem town during the witchcraft crisis. John and Sarah Hale had 4 children between 1685 and 1692. James, Samuel, Joanna, and John. It was while pregnant with John that the witch panic erupted in neighboring Salem Village. Ultimately, Sarah Hale was accused of witchcraft in November. Though never arrested, the fact that an afflicted witness claimed to see the specter of his heavily pregnant wife was certainly enough to sway Reverend Hale. While his skepticism had likely grown as the witch trials continued, Sarah's accusation is considered the most definitive turning point for the minister of Beverly. John and Sarah Hale's great-grandson, Nathan Hale, through his son Samuel's line, is known today for his services as a spy during the American Revolution. Born on June 6, 1755, in Coventry, Connecticut, Nathan Hale was one of 11 children born to Deacon Richard Hale and Elizabeth Strong. In the words of one biographer, quote, "From an early age, the Hales encouraged Nathan and his older brother Enoch to consider the possibility that God was calling them to become pastors in the Congregational Church." Unquote. Though as a youth he attended Yale College, an institution his great uncle had helped found. After his graduation in 1773, he became a schoolmaster, first in East Haddam and then New London, Connecticut. Though he did not immediately join the Continental Army, while teaching in New London, Hale was said to give, quote, "an impassioned speech advocating for freedom and independence from the British in response to the news of the Lexington alarm." Notably, many of his brothers quickly enlisted, including Joseph and John, who both fought at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. After working as a schoolmaster for a year and a half, Nathan Hale followed in his brother's footsteps and joined the army. In July of 1775, he was commissioned as the first lieutenant of Jonathan Lattimore's 3rd Company of the 7th Connecticut Continental Regiment, stationed along the Long Island Sound. By September, he was promoted to captain just before receiving orders to join troops at Boston, where an American campaign to free the British-occupied city had been taking place since April. Though Hale's first term of service was up that December, he continued on in Boston until the siege was won in March of 1776. From Boston, Captain Hale marched with his company to New York. Though his unit assisted with the fortification of the city, Hale was not a part of the ensuing Battle of Long Island. This was the first major battle fought after the signing of the Declaration of Independence and a frustrating defeat for the Continental Army. According to one source, quote, "the fact that he was not involved in the action was very frustrating to Captain Hale, who craved the opportunity to be of real service to his country." Unquote. It was at this time General Washington established a small, specialized number of soldiers under the command of Captain Thomas Knowlton. Known as Knowlton's Rangers, these men were tasked with staying on the front lines, providing key information that would enable swifter responses to the enemy's movement. Though Hale was among those appointed captain of this new unit, he was soon selected for another dangerous assignment. The American Army needed information from behind enemy lines, and 21-year-old Nathan Hale volunteered for this dangerous spy mission. In mid-September of 1776, Captain Hale disguised himself as a Dutch schoolmaster and infiltrated the British camp. He crossed the Long Island Sound from Norwalk, Connecticut, landing in Huntington, Long Island. During his time behind enemy lines, he gathered valuable information about the British troops. Unfortunately, while waiting in Huntington for a prearranged ferry back to Connecticut, he was captured by the British. There are several stories relating to how his true identity was discovered. According to one Connecticut shopkeeper and loyalist, Hale was recognized by Major Robert Rogers. Pretending to be a fellow patriot, Rogers supposedly coaxed Hale to reveal his true identity. Another account alleges it was Samuel, Hale's loyalist cousin, who turned him in. The punishment for a spy was death. Nathan Hale was held captive for several days in the greenhouse of the Beekman Mansion near present-day 50th Street and First Avenue in New York City, while awaiting his execution. He received no trial, but was swiftly condemned to die by hanging on September 22nd. Ironically, this was the same day as the final hanging during the Salem witch trials 84 years before. According to one biographer, quote, "Hale not only faced the gallows with valor, but was also denied many of his last rites. Both the clergyman and Bible he had requested were denied, and letters written to his family were burned. However, in the face of the unrelenting hostility and lack of respect shown to him by his British captors, everyone who witnessed his final moments declared that Captain Hale conducted himself with the utmost dignity." Though it's clear Nathan Hale was executed at the British Artillery Park, the precise location of the gallows remains unknown. Interestingly, one historian has noted this uncertainty is likely due to the fact that Hale's efforts as a spy did not attract significant public attention at the time of his death. His story did not become widely known until Jedediah Morse's popular 1824 Annals of the American Revolution. Though there's several possibilities for this site, the diary of a British officer stated it took place, quote, "near the Dove Tavern at the Old Post Road, now 3rd Street, which is today 66th Street and 3rd Avenue in New York City. When the time came for his execution, it's famously claimed that Nathan Hale stood upon the gallows and said, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Though this appears to be a mythologized element of the story added after his death, these words remained connected to Nathan Hale's memory to this day. According to one British soldier who claimed to be to witness the execution, Hale expressed regret that, quote, "he had not been able to serve my country better, and with great composure and resolution encouraged his captors to be at all times prepared to meet death in whatever shape it presented itself." The day after Nathan Hale's execution, a British captain arrived at the American camp to discuss a prisoner exchange, bringing with him the news of the captain's death. Remarkably, among those present to hear of Hale's execution was General Israel Putnam, another Revolutionary War participant with connections to the Salem witch trials. Israel Putnam was the son of Joseph and Elizabeth Porter Putnam of Salem Village. His father was the stepbrother of the infamous Thomas Putnam, who played a pivotal role in the Salem witch trials. On behalf of his daughter, wife, and servant, each of whom claimed to be tormented by witchcraft, Thomas Putnam filed 35 complaints and personally testified against 17 people in 1692. Thomas's 12-year-old daughter Anne was one of the most active witnesses during the witch trials. In 1867, historian Charles Upham referred to Anne as, quote, "the leading agent in all the mischief that followed." Joseph Putnam was the product of a second marriage. At the age of 44, his father had married Mary Varon, the wealthy widow of a ship captain from Salem town. 4 years later, Mary gave birth to Joseph. With the birth of this child came complications for Thomas and his brothers, ones that intensified with the death of their father in 1686. In his will, Thomas Sr. left his second wife and their only child, then 16-year-old Joseph, the prime parts of his homestead, an arrangement which left the sons from his first marriage feeling slighted. Though the brothers entered into a protracted legal battle in an attempt to break the will, their efforts ultimately came to no avail. At the age of 18, Joseph Putnam became one of the richest men in Salem Village. Joseph only continued to branch away from the Putnam family as he grew older. In 1690, he married Elizabeth Porter. Though still within the boundaries of Salem Village, the Porters were located closer to the water and had more commercial and political influence in Salem town. According to historians Paul Boyer and Stephen Nissenbaum, with this marriage, the young Joseph Putnam, quote, had managed to form a formal alliance with the other family in the village, which rivaled and even surpassed the Putnams in wealth and prestige. Though Joseph appears to have believed the witchcraft accusations early on in the panic, even acting as one of the scribes during the first examinations in March, his opinion swiftly changed as the trials progressed. Family legend holds that he kept a saddled horse ready throughout the trials, fearing he would need to make a quick escape. Israel Putnam, later known as Old Put, was born in Salem Village on January 7, 1718, the second to last of the family's 13 children. He married Hannah Pope in July of 1739. Another Salem Village native, Hannah was the granddaughter of Joseph and Bathsheba Pope. In her 40s during the witchcraft panic, Bathsheba had been an accuser during the Salem trials. Interestingly, as she was the aunt of Benjamin Putnam, Hannah was a first cousin of this founding father. Israel and Hannah had 10 children over the course of their marriage, the first born in Salem Village, the others in Connecticut. After the birth of Israel Jr., the Putnams moved to Pomfret, Connecticut. Hannah died only a few months after giving birth to their last son, Peter. 2 years later, Israel Putnam remarried. His second wife was the already twice widowed Deborah Lathrop Avery Gardner, who brought with her children from previous marriages. According to the National Park Service, Putnam became locally famous at the age of 25 while living in Pomfret, after, quote, having crawled into a wolf's den himself to kill it, since the wolf had been terrorizing his and his neighbor's sheep. This incident made him well known for his bravery, a reputation that followed him throughout his life, unquote. The story became a local legend, even appearing in 19th century author Samuel Goodrich Peter Parley's children's series. This tale, which has become known as Put and the Wolf, describes the brave exploit of Putnam, who entered the cave, quote, armed only with a makeshift torch and a rope around his foot, enabling his comrades to pull him out in the event the wolf attacked. Even before the American Revolution, Israel Putnam had an established military career. He served as a major and then captain during the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, participating in an expedition to Havana and an assault on Fort Ticonderoga. Though Putnam was among those captured by France's Iroquois allies in 1758, brought first to Montreal and then Quebec as a prisoner of war, he was ransomed and returned to combat. After a decade of service, he returned to his home in Connecticut, resuming life as a farmer and even serving in the Connecticut General Assembly. But this peace would not last, as Putnam soon became entwined in the heated political landscape as the country hung on the precipice of revolution. Not only did he become extremely active in the Connecticut Sons of Liberty, but he is said to have sent over 100 sheep to Boston to help feed the populace after the 1774 port shutdown. According to one source, when Putnam heard talk of the eruption of hostility in Massachusetts, he, quote, abandoned his plow in the field to raise the local militia. He then rode for Boston without bothering to change his clothes and made the 100-mile journey in just 8 hours. In May of 1775, Putnam led a successful mission to destroy supplies and ships on Noddle's Island in Boston Harbor. He was made a general in the Continental Army shortly thereafter. As the war progressed, 2 of Israel's sons, his namesake, Israel Jr., and son Daniel, served along their father, both working as his aides de camp. Israel later rose to the rank of captain and then major, Daniel as first lieutenant. Perhaps General Putnam's most famous contribution to the American Revolution was his involvement in the Battle of Bunker Hill. Involved in both the planning and execution of this important battle, Putnam led the men on the front lines on June 17, 1775. Several well-known anecdotes have been passed down regarding General Putnam's actions on that fateful day. According to painter and veteran John Trumbull, Putnam prevented his men from firing on enemy officer John Small during the second advance. Having recognized the man he fought alongside during the 7 Years' War, Putnam seems to have acted to protect his dear friend. Another notes, quote, the entire afternoon, Old Put could be seen riding through the American lines, both encouraging men along the front lines and attempting to goad stragglers back, unquote. Israel Putnam is also attributed with one of the most well-known quotes from the American Revolution. With limited forces and supplies, Putnam is said to have ordered his men they should not fire at the enemy till they saw the whites of their eyes. Like Nathan Hale, General Putnam was soon sent to New York to help strengthen fortifications. He was a commander at the disastrous Battle of Long Island. Unfortunately, it was after this loss that some began to criticize Putnam's tactical abilities. Among his other Revolutionary War credits, General Putnam was given the responsibility of coordinating the defense of Philadelphia in December of 1776. He was in command during the losses of Fort Montgomery and Clinton, major losses which warranted a court of inquiry case. Though he was exonerated of wrongdoing and returned to the battlefield of June of 1778, he was given less strategic commands from this point onward. Sadly, in December of 1779, Israel Putnam suffered a serious stroke, resulting in the paralysis of his right side. As a result of his condition, he retired from active duty, though he received a salary for the remainder of the war because of his exemplary service. Putnam lived for 11 more years, passing away in May of 1790, having lived to see the early days of the country he fought to create. According to the National Park Service, quote, Putnam was widely admired by his soldiers. He was known to spend time with the lower-ranking officers and soldiers, rather than only associating with officers of higher military rank and social class. In speaking of General Putnam's contributions to the war, George Washington once stated, quote, I can assure you that among the many worthy and meritorious officers with whom I have had the happiness to have connection in service, the name of a Putnam is not forgotten. So that is our first round of connections between Revolutionary War participants and Salem witch trials participants. And now we have some time for Q&A if anybody has any questions.
The They're all busily typing.
Yes. I like this presentation. We chose some of the best quotes, I think, for it. Next time around, we won't have the classic quotes. We'll give it a few minutes. Feel free to type it in the chat. You can put it in the Q&A as well. I do see one question, will this be taped so I can watch it later? The person who has already left. Yes, it is being recorded.
I just want to say that my favorite thing in researching this was I went looking to find a lantern as as an example of what the lantern might have looked like, and found out that the Concord Museum actually has in their collection one of the original lanterns from that night. And so I want to shout out to them because they allowed us to use that image.
Yes. And how crazy is that they still have the lantern?
No idea.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Oh, from John Putnam. Did not realize all the other Revolutionary War connections. And there's more. There's just
plenty more. Yeah.
Oh, I also grew up in Pomfret, so the Wolf Den is well known. That was the other thing, actually, that blew my mind, was that the Wolf Den is like a known thing. That is so neat.
Well, and I grew up in Huntington, Long Island, and lived across the street from Nathan Hale Drive. And so when we started doing this, I knew Hale site my whole life, and I had no idea that that was the site of Nathan Hale's crossing.
So many connections, yeah. Is there a list of these subjects, persons? I'm not sure what you mean. So the list of, there's no like complete list that I'm aware of Revolutionary War connections and Salem witch trials connections. It may be on Ancestry or something like that, but I am not aware of it. These are all just things we've come across as we've researched.
And as we research, we'll share more as we find them. These were just the first ones that came to our attention. Oh, yeah. So if you go to South Acton, that Erickson Mills right there, the house is right across the street. I've been there in the winter. I've been there in the summer. I've been there frequently now.
I love the comment, the Wolf Den exploit is told to all the Salem Putnams. I love that this is something that is told now to Putnam family residents. That is so neat. Can you make a list and keep it on your website as you're doing with the webinars? You mean a list of Revolutionary War connections? We could do a blog post or something as we keep them. Yeah, that's something to that we could continually add to, because my worry is we'll put up a small list and then we will get a flood of emails from people saying, but wait, which, it opens up a
has actually started, right? When we first announced this lecture, we heard from a few people.
Yes. Apparently everybody knows about the wolf den. We should the only one who didn't know about it. Yeah, so I really want to go to Connecticut and see the Hale house, because that looks like an incredible property, and they were very kind in this research process. And we did have a conversation at one point where I was like, and the wolf den, and you were like, at a certain point, we can't keep going.
And the Putnam cottage. Yes. And there's a lot to see in Connecticut.
Yes. Oh, well, there you go. I'm not the only one who didn't know about the wolf den. That's nice. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up for the evening? Can you describe the future of your research?
Yeah, never ending.
Yeah.
Is the rest of our lives, probably. We do virtual lectures a couple of times each year. So probably next year there will be at least one relating to the Revolutionary War connection.
And more broadly, we're always doing descendant research. It's something that we've realized is very much in demand. People really want to know more about their ancestors, so we're always adding to our descendant packet series. So if you are a descendant and you want to learn more about your individual relatives, go to our website. There's a For Descendants page on our website, salemwitchmuseum.com, and that's where you can see all the research that's going on specifically related to descendants. I see a message. Can you put the handout on the chat? We didn't have a handout for this presentation, just the PowerPoint. Do you know if the Faulkner home is
So,
open?
dummy me, I reached out to try to get into the house, a couple months ago while researching this, only to discover it had just been open the weekend before for the Revolutionary War business. I think it's open very infrequently, so you just have to keep your eye on it. Yes, so the town family people definitely played a role. Uh, the question is, did
Yeah.
any of the nurse family play a role? So
Yes.
various town family descendants
Yes.
will probably be included in the future.
And thank you for the Henry Hunt at Bunker Hill as a descendant of Susanna Martin.
Oh,
Maybe we can make
Susanna.
this a collaborative
Yeah.
project.
I'm going to write that one down. Henry Hunt,
Bunker Hill.
Susanna.
Very nice. Thank you.
And I also want to say thank you to Jack Darrell. I can't remember if that is his real name, for that beautiful picture
Yes, the one that we have on screen right
of
now.
Old North. It's just fantastic. He allowed us to use this for this presentation.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Um, We appreciate you coming out for this lecture. This was a very well attended evening lecture. So, very exciting. If you don't follow us already, please follow us on social media. We are at Salem Witch Museum on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, everywhere. So that's where we post most frequently about our ongoing research, about our upcoming events, things like that. Interesting facts about the Salem witch trials. We also have a descendant Facebook group, which you are welcome to join, which is just a place where descendants can chat with one another, descendants of the Salem witch trials. And keep an ear out because we do have another upcoming event in September. We're doing a collaboration with the Springfield Museums. So we will have I believe it's the curator of the Springfield Museum is going to be talking about their witchcraft trials, which happened a couple decades before Salem. The event information for that is on our website as well. So we hope to see you in September, and we'll see you next year for our next Revolutionary War presentation. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.